Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that your $10 is suddenly worth only $5. You didn't lose the money. Nobody stole it. The number in your bank account is still the same. So what happened? The answer is inflation. But here's the strange part. Money isn't just something governments print. Most of the money we use every day is actually created by banks. So how does this system really work? Let's start from the beginning. Money is basically a tool that makes trading easier. Imagine you grow apples, and your neighbor grows shoes. You want shoes, but your neighbor doesn't want apples. Without money, you have a problem. But if everyone agrees that a certain object has value, you can exchange your apples for that object, and then use it to buy shoes. That's why money works. It doesn't have value simply because it's a piece of paper. It works because people trust that other people will accept it in exchange for goods and services. Today, that money can exist as physical cash, coins, or simply numbers inside a bank account. And that's where things get interesting. You might think governments create all the money by printing it. Not exactly. Central banks, such as the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, control the supply of physical currency and influence the amount of money circulating in the economy. But commercial banks can create a large portion of the money we actually use. How? Through loans. Imagine you walk into a bank and deposit $1,000. The bank doesn't simply put your $1,000 in a box and forget about it. Instead, banks use deposits and their broader funding to make loans. Now imagine the bank gives another person a $900 loan. That person now has $900 in their bank account. Your $1,000 deposit still exists in the banking system, and a new $900 deposit has appeared in another account. This is one of the mechanisms through which bank lending expands the money supply. So when banks lend money, they can effectively create new deposit money. Now we need to talk about the central bank. Think of the central bank as the system's financial control room. It doesn't control every dollar directly, but it has powerful tools that influence how expensive or cheap borrowing becomes. One of the most important tools is interest rates. When interest rates are low, borrowing tends to become cheaper. Businesses may borrow money to expand. People may borrow to buy homes or other goods. More borrowing can mean more spending. But when inflation becomes too high, the central bank can raise interest rates. Loans become more expensive. People and businesses may borrow less. Spending can slow down, and that can reduce pressure on prices. So interest rates are one of the main ways central banks try to keep the economy stable. Now we need to talk about the central bank. Think of the central bank as the system's financial control room. It doesn't control every dollar directly, but it has powerful tools that influence how expensive or cheap borrowing becomes. One of the most important tools is interest rates. When interest rates are low, borrowing tends to become cheaper. Businesses may borrow money to expand. People may borrow to buy homes or other goods. More borrowing can mean more spending. But when inflation becomes too high, the central bank can raise interest rates. Loans become more expensive. People and businesses may borrow less. Spending can slow down, and that can reduce pressure on prices. So interest rates are one of the main ways central banks try to keep the economy stable. Now let's get to the big question. Why do prices rise? Inflation can happen for several reasons. One is when demand grows faster than the economy's ability to produce goods and services. Imagine there are only 100 pizzas in a city, but suddenly everyone has more money and wants to buy pizza. There are still only 100 pizzas. Restaurants can raise prices because people are competing for the same limited supply. Another cause is rising production costs. If energy, transportation, raw materials, or wages become more expensive, companies may increase prices to cover those costs. And sometimes inflation is influenced by supply shocks, such as wars, natural disasters, or major disruptions to global trade. So inflation isn't simply the government printed money, therefore prices went up. The real economy is much more complicated. This sounds like an easy solution. Imagine a country has $1 million. Why not print another $1 billion and make everyone rich? Because money isn't wealth. Wealth comes from things like houses, food, energy, technology, factories, services, and human productivity. If you double the amount of money, but don't double the amount of goods and services available, you haven't magically created twice as much wealth. You have simply created more money competing for roughly the same amount of stuff, and that can push prices higher. Think of it like this. If there are 10 pizzas and 10 people, each person can potentially buy one pizza. But if everyone suddenly has enough money to buy 5 pizzas, there still aren't enough pizzas. The money increased, the pizzas didn't. That's one simple way to understand inflation. Inflation isn't just a number on the news. It affects your everyday life. Imagine you have $10,000 sitting in cash. If prices rise significantly over time, that $10,000 may still be $10,000, but it may buy fewer things. This is why people often care about the difference between their income growth and inflation. If your salary rises by 5%, but prices rise by 8%, your purchasing power can actually fall. In other words, earning more money doesn't necessarily mean becoming richer. What matters is what that money can actually buy. So let's put everything together. Money is a system based heavily on trust. Central banks influence the monetary system and interest rates. Commercial banks create much of the money we use through lending and deposits. Businesses and consumers borrow, spend, save, and invest. And prices change based on the interaction between money, demand, supply, production costs, expectations, and many other economic forces. That's why the economy is less like a simple machine and more like a giant network where everything affects everything else. So, the next time you look at the number in your bank account, remember, that number isn't wealth itself. It's a claim on goods and services. And the real question isn't simply how much money do I have? It's what can that money actually buy? Because once you understand that, you start to see money in a completely different way.